Good afternoon, everyone. Like I said, thank you so much for being here. My name is Yasmeen Baxter. I'm the Youth Workforce Development Coordinator with Families Together in New York State, and I'm also a professional YPA. Today's webinar is titled Help Me Help Youth, a new lens on approaching youth-guided care, hosted by FTNYS and CTAC, and presented by Onyx Walker, who is a peer consultant with New York City Youth Action Board, and who is also a YPA, and myself. So before we get started, I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping items. One is that everyone has been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. If you have any technical issues during this webinar, please reach out to one of the hosts via the chat feature, and Vanessa will be able to assist you. We're also going to have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, so we encourage you to chat in your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll address as many as we can as time allows at the end of this presentation. We would appreciate it if you could take a moment to fill out the brief feedback survey that will appear in the chat box at the end of the webinar and let us know if you have any suggestions or topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Today's recording and presentation slides will be posted on the CTAG website within the next 2 to 3 business days for your reference. We're very excited to have Onyx and myself speak to you all about helping you help youth. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to pass it off to Onyx now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you all could join us. Yasmeen, that was a fantastic introduction. I don't think that I could follow that up any better than you already started. So with that being said, let's get started. Today's presentation is titled Help Me Help Youth, a new lens on approaching youth-guided care. Again, my name is Onyx Walker. I'm a peer consultant, and I work with the New York City Youth Action Board, and you can find my email below as well. Yasmeen's information is also here for your reference for later. So let's get into it. Our goal for today is to learn to include and center young people in the work that we do. As service providers, advocates, and mentors, understanding the role we play in empowerment of young people is key to uplifting and valuing them, right? We want to make sure that we're empowering young people and not sort of just giving them the power. We want them to empower themselves as well, right? So that's what we're going to explore today. We are your presenters. You know, this is probably the third time, but we want to make sure that you know our face and you can become well acquainted with us. We both have our YPAC, so we received certification for it and are proud to share some of our knowledge with you guys. So here's our structure for this presentation, okay? We're going to study, we're going to theorize, and we're going to practice, right? What does that mean? Well, we're going to gather information and we're going to learn together. That's the studying part, right? So I'm going to give you guys some information so that way you can refer back to it as you continue to do your work. But we're going to go through that together, right? We're going to theorize, right? So at some point, you'll be discussing with peers and other folks here on ways that you can put the information that you've been given to use. And then we're going to practice, right? So after you've discussed with your peers, after you've been given the information, you're going to take those tools and figure out new ways that you can change the way that you approach young people, hopefully for the better. So here comes the study part. What is youth-guided care? Okay, we're just going to come out the gate and do our best to define it. I will also say before I go any further, if you have any thoughts or comments, please feel free to share them throughout the course of this presentation. And when the Q&A section comes up, we'll spend some time going through them. So the practice of investing in youth to aid in accomplishing goals through the use of their lived experience. It incorporates principles like inclusive decision-making to ensure that young people are adequately represented in each process they are involved in, right? We're not making decisions for young people. We're involving them in the decision-making process because they are just as important to this as we are. So here are some principles to follow. These are some things that I came up with, but they helped me accomplish the work that that I do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm hoping that it can help you as well. Feel free to add to these principles of your own, but I think these are enough to get you started. We are experts of us. Young people are experts of their own destiny and lead the charge toward their own future. Trust them to let you know what their needs are for themselves and how much support they need. Lived experience is still experience. When working with lived experts, especially young people, it is important to keep in mind that their experience is pivotal to understanding and connecting with young people or others that share similar experience. The same way that a doctor with years on the job will know what to look for in a patient is the same way a young person can relate and assess the best ways to engage with another young person, right? So, two doctors will have nothing but expertise to share amongst themselves about what it is that they're doing. So it'll be easier for them to reach the same level and connect with one another. Young people are the same way, and their experience in life is relevant to whatever decisions that we're making for and with them, right? So trust them. Tokenization will cost you, right? When you work with young people, you run the risk of hindering quality feedback if you try to control your interactions with them. There shouldn't just be sections where only young people can talk and no other space for that. They should be treated as a valued member of any team or plan you seek their participation in, right? So if you're providing service to a young person or you are working on a team that has young people, do your best to not isolate them by saying, okay, this is time for the young people to speak up, and that is the only place for them to speak up. They should be free to speak just as any of your other team members would. So be mindful of that interaction. And challenge, not charity. Okay. Remember that young people are also aspiring professionals and not a charity case or a diversity hire. Take their opinions seriously, but treat them as your peers too. Challenging young people in a healthy way promotes growth, right? So, if you're working with young people, there's no reason that you shouldn't be having young people on your team. But it's important to know that the goal here is to get quality from young people and not just, again, isolate them, right? You want them to have a welcome space on the team, and their experience is not their only value that they bring to the team. It's only one portion of it. So keep that in mind. So what are lived experts? I've spoken about lived experts for a little while, but it's time to define it. Individuals that have experienced living/surviving through a particular struggle or hardship. This makes them credible messengers as they can attest to nuanced difficulties through their firsthand knowledge of the subject matter. They use their life experience to help others overcome or navigate their struggles. There are many different ways that you can incorporate lived experts into your work, and there are many different roles that already exist. And we'll get into some of those now, actually. So one example is a peer navigator. Peer navigators existed in drop-in centers as credible messengers to help runaway and homeless youth navigate housing instability and emerge from homelessness, right? So drop-in centers are one-stop shops for homeless young people looking for services, whether to wash their clothes or looking for a hot meal. Peer navigators existed in those hubs to help young people. The role can be translated into other facets or fields, but the core is that they're lived experts. They're hands-on with helping emerge from a situation that's difficult through understanding the systems involved and can provide tangible solutions, right? So peer navigators are young people that work with another young person to help them figure out a path forward when they're experiencing hardship. It's been used in drop-in centers, but I'm sure this can be replicated in many other places as well. Youth peer advocates like myself and Yasmeen, we exist as credible messengers to other young people in need of guidance or a relatable figure. The role varies in terms of the type of work that's needed and can range from mental health to justice involved and more. This definition is fairly short because youth peer advocate roles are so much more flexible, and you're allowed to be imaginative with how you handle hiring for a youth peer advocate. I believe every team that works in the mental health field or justice involved, any team that works with young people has a space for youth peer advocates. And so I challenge you all to think of a way that you can incorporate youth peer advocates into your work, because the impact is immeasurable. It's only positive. So just keep that in mind. And youth action board members. Some of you may be familiar with youth action boards, but these young people are all lived experts and provide feedback, consultancy, and review of the systems that they've been involved in. It's typically connected to mental health or runaway and homeless youth, and they're often a point of contact for folks developing services or continuous quality improvement, right? So if you work in an organization, there is a process that your organization undergoes called continuous quality improvement to improve the services that you provide, to improve the flow of work, just to improve your overall organizational ability and capacity. And youth action boards are pivotal to organizations and teams that work with young people. I've been a part of a youth action board and actually work with one currently. And the work that they've done has been super impactful and it affects New York City very strongly. So I would suggest for anyone working with young people to look into it. Super helpful. So now we're going to theorize. Okay, so this is the fun part. Incorporating youth voice. The best way to incorporate youth guided care into our work is to consult with young people. Let's consider what we already do to uplift the voice of young people on our staff or teams and when providing service to them. Let's begin to think about how we can incorporate new ideas into our work in a suitable way for young people. So, value versus volume. For value, what could be some outcomes from working with the same small group of young people consistently over a long period of time? For volume, what could be some outcomes of working with a large group of young people over a short period of time? Does it make sense to consult with a few diverse young people instead of many of the same demographics? Is that more or less effective? So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into breakout groups, right? We're going to put this to practice, right? Again, this is my favorite part. I love being able to practice theories. So we'll be split up into groups based on value and volume, okay? So one group will discuss this value-based format, having less participants, right? You'll be split up into smaller groups, and you'll discuss the value format. Some of you will be split into a volume-based group, where you'll discuss the volume-based format, having more participants, okay? The questions that you're gonna be discussing, I'll put them in the chat for you as well. And once you're split up into the groups, you're free to discuss that for about 20 minutes. Again, we really want to put to practice what this looks like. And after the breakout groups, we'll have a report back. So please make sure that you assign somebody to do a report back. We'll be popping in and out just to check on conversations and make sure that folks are sort of on track. Okay. So we talked about value versus volume. These were the questions that we had. Some of you were in value-based groups. Some of you were in volume-based groups. Let's hear from one of the volume-based groups. Megan, I think you were in room 1 and you were the report back person. What did you guys discuss?
So question 1 regarding outcomes with large people. We have different pros and cons with this. With having a larger group, you have a greater quantity of data. With large groups, if it's in person, this provides an opportunity for the youth to form connections with individuals from diverse backgrounds that they typically may not have been interacting with. The larger the group, the greater number of people from different demographics, which means that you can get a more well-rounded idea of responses for the question or the topic. A shorter period of time was considered a really good idea because it keeps the youth from getting bored, and it also gives, the ability to digest small bits of information and still be engaged. Some cons is that a larger group can lead to some people who are more reserved. They may not be sharing, they may not feel comfortable speaking up. So you might only hear from a few very extroverted individuals. Another con is that it can be hard to stay on track, particularly with youth when they get excited about different topics. And that can be challenging. If you have a lot of people, it can be hard to stay on one topic.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds sounds about right. I mean, I think as you have said, I think there are pros and cons to having a large group of young people over a short period of time. You know, I think there are assumptions that we make about young people, and one of those assumptions is about their attention span. I think something really important to note is if what it is that you're doing is engaging, anyone will be able to be tuned in and locked in, unless they're distracted with other things, of course. But one pro of working with a large group, you alluded to it, is you can reach more people, right? You can reach more young people, which is good for being able to sort of understand where different types of people stand on the same topic, right? But the challenge with that as well is sometimes with a large group, you're not able to get full and quality feedback because the amount of time that each person has to share suddenly becomes diminished since you want to hear from everyone, right? And so that's a con attached to that. Room two, I'm forgetting who was the report back person, but you were in a volume-based group. Would you like to share? Thank you, Megan, for sharing. There were only two volume-based groups, so the other group that didn't get to share.
I think that was us. This is Lorraine. There's two of us that spoke at once.
Yep.
Okay. So, we shared that, with the smaller groups, it might be more person-centered. And cultural understanding for people. And then, for the larger groups, we were saying that there may be more resources, services to access, and more life experiences. Does anyone in my group want to help me out here? Sorry, guys. Go ahead. Let me just jump down.
Yeah, and we had mentioned, just to back up, Lorraine, that they would have more resources available to them in a larger setting. And I think we mentioned it all already.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think the wealth of information that you get will vary naturally between value versus volume. And I think you're alluding to, there being more young people to pull from. And so there just should be more resources in general. I will say that's not always the case. And so you have to make do with what you have. But yeah, I do have a follow-up question for either one of you, since you were doing the report back. Did you decide on whether it made sense to consult with a few diverse young people from different demographics or many young people of the same demographics?
I think we had come to a conclusion that both have benefits, but it's probably best to get information from a larger group.
Okay. More on that later. Thank you for your answer. Thanks for sharing.
We had different perspectives on this. One of the things we have is who is making the selection of these young people. Are they able to be objective? Are they going to be biased in who they pick? Are they going to pick people that they know are going to give them the responses that they desire? Or, and this can be intentional or unintentional. So like if you have a smaller group, you run that risk of bias. A small group can be less effective if you want diverse responses, because then you can't compare and take culture under consideration. A small group can be more effective for focusing on like specific topics or specific questions that are relating to just one thing. But having a group of individuals from the same demographic, it doesn't guarantee they've had the same lived experience.
All good points. All good points. You alluded to sample bias when people are conducting research and sort of choosing the participants by hand, therefore affecting the outcome of the data that you get from the research, which I think is a good point to bring up because, I think a lot of times when we work with young people, there are some that are like chosen to be the standout young people, which has its benefits, but it also has its negatives because it limits perspectives and promotes a very particular sort of behavior. So thank you for sharing that, Megan. And thank you both for giving me a report back of what you guys discussed. Really appreciate it. Value group, there were two, but it ended up being one. So if I could get someone from that group to report back on what they discussed, that'd be great. Uh-oh, it seems we've hit a roadblock. The value group was a question that was the group that was discussing the question, what could be some outcomes from working with the same small group of young people consistently over a long period of time? That would be room 4. And I believe Yasmeen popped into your group a few times.
Yep, so we had Frank, Hemin, I don't know if I'm saying that incorrectly. I'm sorry if I am. Natasha, Russell. Seems like you all had some great feedback. So if one of you all or a couple of you would like to share with the larger group at this time, that would be great.
Well, we never decided on who's going to be the speaker, so I'll jump in.
Okay, thanks.
This is Russ. We saw value in both the small diverse groups and the larger too, but for outcomes, we saw that it was going to be a lot of value in the small group because you're going to build better rapport, have a little better trust, maybe a little better understanding, understanding of both the individual and group dynamics. All of that's going to impact the ability to go and make better outcomes. And on the downside, there was that there could be, of course, less feedback, like we were talking about with people that are less outgoing. Of course, we didn't discuss that, but I mean, somebody mentioned that in one of the other groups, and it'd be the same for us as well in a small group. I can't remember actually some of the other stuff that we discussed. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of what you're saying resonates, right? I think, when you have a smaller group, what happens when this group of people is reluctant to share, right? So you have 3 people and none of them are outspoken and more reserved in their approach to problem solving, right? How do you get this group to move forward, right? Sometimes you're faced with that challenge, and it seems like folks might have faced some of that challenge in their own groups, right? So I think you alluded to that a little bit, Russell. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to share what they discussed in that group?
I still have some of y'all's feedback in the chat. I don't know if you all have it on your side of things, but from when I entered your group, you all were saying, and I'm just reading the chat here, trust building, opening up becomes easier. And then one downside may be that there will be fewer new experiences to build new skills on. And then now in the chat from Jennifer, I see that she's added a few things as well.
I see. Oh, Jennifer, would you like to share? Or
Sure. I'm sorry. I was trying to speak, but I have they're fixing my bathroom and there's like a lot of noise. So as far as a smaller crowd, I feel that it'll be more intimate. It'll create more of a sense of inclusivity and a sense of belonging. Um, as you mentioned, people have difficulties opening up when there's like a larger crowd. So creating like a more intimate environment creates, more comfortable setting for, people to open up about their truths. A bigger demographic, I feel, would be definitely more challenging. It's hard again for people to open up about their issues, and also it also creates a sense of like of people being overlooked. People want to speak up, and it's just challenging to have a crowd, speaking about one thing at the same time and trying to resolve the situation when there's just so many people that you have to look at. So it's very complex, but it's not that it won't get resolved, but it just creates a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, again, you guys are touching on some of the core aspects of what it's like working with groups of young people, right? Or just groups in general, right? As humans, sometimes we're reluctant to do certain things, and sometimes there are challenges that come about. We're social creatures, right? And so that means that interactions will be nuanced and they will be complex, exactly as you said, Jennifer. And so I think it's important to think about how you collect feedback and how you work with young people, and understand the differences between them, right? What are the challenges that will come with each one? Because you're going to face challenges, without a doubt. And if you're collecting feedback, there's not exactly one right way to do it, but there is a wrong way to do it. And the wrong way would be to limit how you receive feedback. So it really all depends. So thank you
I think
all.
I saw Natasha come off of mute. Did you want to share before we move on?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I think everything was added. I was just going to read some of the stuff that was shared because I still had it. In our group, we talk about just the engagement also being greater when it's a smaller group and we talk about value. But in everything, there's always a flip side, the possibility that in as much as the engagement might be greater, when you do come across those instances where no one wants to share. If they're, let's say, they're more of a bunch that, closing it like, okay, no, that's just personal. Then it's like pulling teeth. Then how do you get them engaged? So we had that. Also, one of my group members shared about, the fewer experiences, new experiences to build new skills on, which I think was pretty interesting because then, we often think of a smaller group and the value that comes from that is, strengthening those skills, building on those skills, making sure that, you advance those skills. But what about new experiences with those skills? What new skills can be taught? So I liked that was brought up. So I'll just add that and leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Natasha. You're absolutely right. Everything that you're saying, it just alludes to the nuanced ways that we interact with people in general, but especially young people, right? Like when people don't want to share, what do you do? How do you go about it, right? I could give you guys the answers, but that would be no fun. I'd much rather us discuss it together. So thank you all for discussing that and sharing. Really appreciate it, because that's the best way to learn, to think about what you know and then think about how to expand upon it. All right. So what have we learned? I'm going to give you some answers, but not all of them. And they're vague. So, do with that what you will. Young people are the best at helping other young people. Young people will communicate with their peers in a way that others cannot. This makes them indispensable to any service, team, or company that involves young people, right? Again, we talked about what happens when young people don't want to share, right? And as I said, humans are social creatures. So once one person shares, the likelihood that another person is willing to engage increases automatically. especially if it's another young person, right? So if you're looking for feedback from young people, try having a young person facilitate that conversation. It might help you. Value versus volume, which we just discussed. Well, that depends on your organizational needs. It seems like that's what it boiled down to, right? Either way, spending time to get honest quality feedback directly from the source is the key to improving youth-guided care practices, right? So you may be in a situation where, Megan, I think you alluded to this in your group, where it's about homeless young people. Are you going to then go and consult young people who haven't been homeless about how to navigate homelessness? You could, but is it effective? Probably not as effective as focusing on people who have experienced it, right? But then again, it depends on what solution you're looking for. What are your organizational needs, right? Maybe you're a program that provides direct service to young people who need mental health supports, right? Maybe you want to consult with a few young people so that way they can feel like their input is more valued. You can spend more time really unpacking some of the challenges that they've had, right? Which might eventually help you be able to troubleshoot their personal problems while also improving the quality of how your org responds to young people. Maybe it's volume. Maybe you're just looking to figure out how to change policy. Let's say you're an advocacy-based organization and you want to change something for young people. Maybe volume is better, right? Maybe there are a lot of young people that are affected by it, and it might strengthen your advocacy by speaking to more young people, right? So you guys all hit the nail on the head. It does depend, and there are pros and cons to both. It was a trick question. There was no right answer. So I'm glad you guys discussed it. And be creative, right? Again, because there's no right answer, and Natasha, you alluded to this a little while ago. You sort of have to think a little bit creatively on how you want to get young people to engage with you, no matter which format you choose, right? Flexibility will allow for new ideas and helping young people choose a path that works for them. As clients, professionals, and even just for feedback, there are many ways to put the power back into young people's hands. Trust them to guide you and work together to reach their goals. If you're working with a young person who's receiving case management services, right? Do not make any case plan without consulting the young person on how they feel about it. Maybe they should decide their goals, and maybe you should help them sort of rein it in, right? If you feel like the goals might be a bit unrealistic. If they are a bit unrealistic, maybe try to help them get to a place where they can accomplish them and the impossible becomes possible, right? So just think about that. So now is the practice section. This is where I pass it to my colleague Yasmeen to talk about effective communication.
Okay, so we're going to talk about effective communication in advocacy. We want to start by putting ourselves in the youth's shoes. So I don't see any cameras on here, but just think to yourself, have you ever frozen up when being put on the spot, when being asked a tough question that maybe you didn't expect to have to answer, especially in front of a group? I know I definitely have. The youth that we serve may not always be able to vocalize their concerns when they're in need of advocacy. Okay, thank you for the thumbs up. I love a thumbs up. Yeah. In those moments, right, where they're expected to advocate for themselves, or they have to answer that tough question, or they have to say something that maybe is not gonna, be the most popular thing. It's not gonna be what other people want to hear, but it's how they really feel and what they really need. They may not know how to do that in the moment, and that's why they need us as their advocates to be sensitive to that. And this comes with building trust and rapport with the youth, because that empowers not only them, but us as service providers and peers to pick up on the nonverbal cues that they may be able to give when they are in need of a little bit more fierce advocacy, right? Like maybe they're not able to say, hey, Russell or Natasha, I need you to advocate for me right now. But there may be signs and cues that they can give that will let you know, okay, this youth is struggling right now. And we can go to the next slide. So here are a couple avenues, right, that I can think about in a specific situation. So we're putting ourselves in the mindset now. We're in a med review with the youth, right? So there's often a med prescriber, maybe the youth's family, the youth, and then yourself as an advocate, right? Just putting ourselves in this situation. So we can directly ask the youth. One example, right? Hey, Johnny, it looks like you might need a little bit more time to answer the med prescriber's question. Do you want to take a break in the other room for 10 minutes? That's one example of directly asking, right? So we're in this med review and we're starting to pick up on nonverbal cues. We can see the youth biting their shirt. We can see them picking their nails. We can see now they can't sit still. Now they're reaching for the phone, even though they were instructed not to be on their phone when they're receiving services, right? Like little cues like that, that if you get to know the youth and you build rapport with them, you can start to see when they're physically uncomfortable. And that's usually an opening to let you know internally they're dealing with something that they can't vocalize in that moment. As providers, as advocates, it's important for us to remember that one seemingly harmless question, right? In this example, it's about a med review, right? So about how a youth is responding to medication can trigger them in regard to how that medication has caused them to gain weight, how they've been bullied for being on medication at all, how they feel worthless, and that's why they need the medication, right? So it's one simple question, but it can take time and trust for them to express everything that's going on internally. And I think it's very easy for us as adults and as providers, right, to say, okay, well, I'm meeting with Johnny at 4:30, and then I have a 15-minute commute, and I might have to stop and get gas, and my next meeting's at 5. So I need him to answer these questions as I'm asking them, right? But youth are not robots, right? They're people. They have nuanced experiences and a very rich internal world oftentimes. So just giving them that grace and extending a little bit more time, right? Like if they're not being responsive to your question, it might not mean that they don't have the answer. It just might mean they need a little bit more time to find the words. So another avenue is establishing nonverbal cues. So in this same mindset, right, of being in a med review with a youth, one example is prior to that med review, so maybe you meet with the youth every week. So the week prior, you inform the youth what they can expect at this meeting. This is advocacy too, right? It's just letting them know what's coming so they don't feel as anxious leading up to it. So here's who's going to be in the room. Here's how long it usually takes. Here's what you can expect at this meeting, the types of questions, right? And just letting them know that's advocating for them in advance because you're empowering them to come equipped with all the things they're going to need, right? It's going to be at this time. I know you usually don't like to meet right after school, but this is the only time the med prescriber is available. So it's just going to be this one time, but here's what you can expect, right? And then you can let them know if they begin to feel anxious, right? At the med review next week, in this example, or they need time to think, they can bounce their knee under the table. So nobody else can see it, but you'll know when you see that knee bouncing under the table because you're sitting next to them that they might need a little bit more time to think, or they're starting to escalate. They're starting to feel uncomfortable. And then you can say, hey, maybe we can take a breather and Johnny can think about this question for 5 to 10 minutes and we'll come back. Hey, you want to bounce the basketball outside for a couple minutes? They can tap on your hand if they feel comfortable to do something like that. It can be subtle like that. Or they can use a specific fidget where nobody would know what that means except for you. So if they are fearing retaliation, right, for any reason, or they just feel embarrassed about being uncomfortable in that moment, then you can kind of take the brunt of it as an advocate. And then you being able to do that, right, showing that it's okay to need a little bit more time to think, that models for them how they can do it for themselves in the future. Because our goal is for them to not need us forever. But in these moments, right, we're able to model how they can do it for themselves once they graduate out of our care.
Sweet. Thank you, Yasmeen. So speaking of building rapport, the challenge that comes with building rapport is a lot of people expect it to happen instantaneously, right? So what Yasmeen is describing here, right, is where you have a relationship with a young person and they trust you, right? And that might take some time, right? So it's important to not rush the process, right? Went back, but there's no easy way to build rapport. And there are no shortcuts, especially with young people, right? Young people, they can see through it, right? They can see through the, hey, I'm just trying to build a relationship because this is my job, right? But if you have genuine effort to build with and trust young people and you get to know them, you listen to them, you support their peers who are a part of their support system, you'll have an amazing standard of working with young people and helping them. You want to hire them, challenge young people you provide service to grow and decide on their own personal goals, right? Rapport isn't just, I'm going to do it, you say. Rapport is, let's figure out what we need to do to help you, right? So to get to that place where you're able to communicate with the young person who is in need of your services or your assistance, right? You want to make sure that you're spending time genuinely getting to know them and make sure that you actually are trying to help, right? Because they know, and it's hard to hide. Can't fool young people. So conclusion, this is sort of just a gathering of how we approach this, and Yasmeen could attest to this as well. Youth-guided care is care where young people are given a decision-making role in their own lives, as well as the policies and procedures governing their care in every community. It includes supporting the right of young people to be both educated and empowered. It also includes young people having a sustainable voice and then listening to their voice. A youth-guided approach realizes the continuum of power that exists and shares it with young people, utilizing a strength-based change process. Youth-guided organizations recognize that this process is also fun and worthwhile, right? Again, this conclusion is really short and succinct, but the idea here is it's about young people at the end of the day. And if you are going to work with young people, you have to make sure that they have the agency to make decisions for themselves with your support, right? We are not making decisions for young people. We're allowing them to make decisions for themselves and supporting them to reach the best possible outcome, right? Whether that's us providing service or we work with them, or maybe we just want some feedback, right? It's important that you don't do anything for youth without them, and all of your conversations should be rooted in that process. Believe that young people can accomplish what it is that they say that they want to, right? That's the strength-based change process that's mentioned here, okay?
Yeah, I think speaking to Onyx's point too, it's that there's just not one correct way to provide youth-guided care. So it kind of depends on what setting you're working within, right? Because that kind of defines how you're able to show up. And then also meeting the youth where they're at, right? So I know I've worked in a clinical setting as a YPA, and I've also worked in a residential setting as a YPA. How I show up to be youth guided in a residential setting where it's a lot more informal, like they're literally coming from their house and their house clothes, versus a clinical setting where this is like their big outing for the week and all their family had to come with them and leave the house and drive 20 minutes. It's a lot more stiff versus a lot more flexible, right? So meeting them where they're at, they're going to show up as two different versions of themselves, maybe even if you're the same. But for example, like in a residential setting, it's a lot more about community building and character building, right? Because you're meeting them almost at home, right? And so sometimes it's conflict resolution. Like I was working in a Section 8 housing where there was peers for an after-school program. And there we were actually dealing a lot more with generational trauma than, for example, in a clinical setting, how to empower yourself verbally in a med review, right? But both is youth guided, both is peer support. I think another thing is we were all that age at one time. Maybe we weren't all depressed. Maybe we weren't all having the same set of issues or challenges that we're up against, right? But just kind of providing that perspective that there's a different way of doing things, that your world, it might seem very fixed or maybe very small right now, but there's a lot more to experience out there, and you're going to get where you want to be one day, and just kind of inspiring that hope, right? Because that's really what they're looking for in a peer, is someone that they can relate to in some way, and someone that lets them know it is going to get better. And then reminding them too that we're not their saviors and they're not going to need us forever. Like I said, they're going to graduate out of our care, and maybe one day they'll be the ones in our shoes empowering another young person down the line.
Well said, Yasmeen. I don't know how to follow that up, but I will say that, when you work with young people, as a young person, as a staff person, as an older adult, right? Like I said, have real, genuine conversations, right? Not just the basic questions that you're supposed to ask, not just the basic, hey, how are you doing stuff, right? Really try to get to know and understand the person, because it helps. It helps a lot. And I think one challenge that I also see people have when working with young people is there's a fine line between supporting young people and allowing everything, right? Growth is not easy, and there's something that some of us might know called growing pains, right? So, there may be some times where you have to challenge a young person to exceed their limitations. You may have to challenge a young person to think differently. There's no trick to how to do this, but the key is to not try to force them into it, right? Introduce the idea to them, and find a way to explain it in a comprehensible way, right? Because again, it's about challenging young people to exceed their own expectations and the limits that they put on themselves, right? Society already puts a lot of limitations on young people as it is, while also not supporting young people enough. And so, if you allow everything, then you, as a mentor or a role model or adult support, limit their growth, right? So you want to make sure that, and by allow, I don't mean like you're the parent or anything like that. I mean to say that if you're working together with them, don't just go along with everything, right? There are times where you may need to challenge a young person to exceed their own limitations. A young person might think that they're not capable of something, and that's a time where you need to challenge them, right? And if they're really not capable of it, take your time, right? Because maybe today they won't be, but as Yasmeen said, they will eventually graduate from our care or from whatever situation they're in, and they may need to be able to call upon that skill that they didn't get the chance to develop, right? So just some food for thought. And with that, we have reached the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. After this, we will have a Q&A section, but I just want to show appreciation for all of you. You all took a step here to think differently about how you work with young people and really challenge yourselves. We really wanted to make sure that you had some time to reflect on the information that's there. And so, yeah, feel free to use the chat feature for this next portion. Feel free to come off mute and share your question with us. Reactions are perfectly fine. I take applause. So
Great. Okay, so thank you, Onyx, and everyone here for your wisdom, for your vulnerability. I would like to just open up the chat or allow people to come off of mute. If you have any questions about anything that's been shared, about providing youth-guided care, or maybe just comments on how you incorporate youth-guided care and principles into your work. Great, thank you. Thank you. So glad y'all were here. I'm just looking in the chat now. I know it definitely takes me some time to process when I'm hearing or learning something. So we'll give y'all a minute or two. Come up with any questions or comments. Thank y'all for being here.
Thanks for doing this and putting it together. I think you guys gave a really good overview of the different styles of empowering youth and also like the different values and pros and cons of how we can empower them to use their voice and in what types of settings.
Thank you, Megan. I see Isamar put in the chat, are there any resources you can provide for youth who run away from home often? I think this is an area of expertise for you, Onyx, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
I do think there is a short answer, yes. Long answer, it depends, right? I think it depends on their age. Because if they are young adult age, which is I think 17 to 25, there are runaway and homeless youth services for those young people. However, if they are under that age, that would be sort of under the jurisdiction of like ACS and foster care, which I do work to try to dismantle the challenges that are faced with that. And, a lot of foster care young people end up becoming homeless young adults as well. But there are resources. What I can do for you is you can contact me directly, and I will put a list of places that may be able to help young people get resources.
Okay, great. Thank you. So if there are no more questions, we can go to the next slide. Okay, looks like you have a couple different people interested in that resource. So that's great. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some upcoming events. There is Applying an Intersectionality Lens to Mental Health Service Delivery happening on June 20th from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. So I hope y'all can make it. And then there's Supporting Families with Grief and Loss on June 28th from 12:30 p.m. to 2 p.m. And feel free to like stick around after this meeting if you would like additional information on how to register for that, or you can put your question in the chat and we can help you out with that. So thank you again, Onyx, for the great presentation. And thank you everyone for your time, your attention, your feedback, your participation. As a reminder, today's recording and slides will be available on the CTAG website within the next 2 to 3 business days. Our coordinator will be sending a link in the chat box shortly, so you can complete our brief feedback survey, which you will also receive in an email in case you're unable to complete it at this time. We welcome your feedback and we thank you. You can be as honest as you feel comfortable with us. On behalf of FTNYS and CTAG, Onyx, and myself, thank you for joining us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.